live session for February. Thank you for joining me. We had to move the date at a bit of short notice, so I hope there's a few of you out there watching, and we'll definitely answer as many questions as we can for you today. Today's topic is how to use actives and vitamins in cosmetic formulas. Now, we do have this nice little summary presentation. This is, of course, available in our Dropbox, where you would find all of our free formulas and reports. If you already have that Dropbox link, this presentation is in there for you. If you don't have that Dropbox link yet, please email us info@personalcarescience.com.au, and you'll be able to find this presentation along with every other live presentation and every other free formula and report for all of our YouTube videos. Just want to remind you that we now have over 300 different videos on our YouTube channel. If you are searching for any sort of formulating, regulatory, or brand management type topic, please go to our YouTube channel and type in the search bar, and you'll be amazed at how many different videos or topics will come up that will suit your searches. And of course, if there's something you are looking for that we don't have a video on, please email us info@personalcarescience.com.au, because this channel is there to solve your formulating, brand management, and regulatory type problems. And if you're asking it, then there's bound to be at least one other person out there that wants to ask the same question. Just a little friendly reminder about who we are, if you weren't already aware. We are 15 years old this year. We have internationally recognized training, and of course it is industry recognized training. When you study with us, you will be able to join the International Federation for Society of Cosmetic Chemists, and you'll also be able to join your local cosmetic chemist chapter as well. And we do really encourage that you join these, attend events, and network with other professionals. There's a huge amount of opportunity to be had by networking with other like-minded professionals, not to mention also finding your suppliers, manufacturers, other consultants that may be able to support your business or needs. Why would you study with IPCS? We were founded in 2007, like I say, 15 years old this year. It's always been 100% online training. And again, we've got that industry recognition, and we are also audited and accredited by the government. Now, we've got a little meet the full team link for you here. You can go to our website and meet the full team. We've got some pictures there. It's not just me here helping you. We've got some very experienced and knowledgeable trainers that are there to support you along your study journey. And again, what's the difference with studying with Institute of Personal Care Science? Our Diploma of Personal Care Formulation is the course that you would study if you want to be a fully qualified cosmetic chemist. It does represent about 1,200 hours of professional study. So it's not just a weekend course. It's not just a 100-hour course. It is a internationally recognized, government recognized diploma qualification, and you will be a qualified cosmetic chemist on completion and recognized by the International Federation for Society of Cosmetic Chemists. If you want to find out more information, please visit our website. We've got lots of information about all of our courses there, and it's all about making sure you pick the study that's right for your goals, and we're happy to help you make sure that you're making the right decision into which course you should be studying. So now let's get into the topic for today. Now, before I start, again, apologies for having to move the date, but I think it's really important you actually know why I've had to move the date. Just last week, I had a biopsy on my nose, and I've been diagnosed with a squamous cell carcinoma. It's a skin cancer. I am still relatively young. For those of you who always guess the age, and I know a lot of people ask, I am 45, so it is relatively young to be diagnosed with one of these skin cancers, but I've also got to it relatively quickly. The moral of the story is use sunscreen. I remember growing up in Australia, back when I was like, 8, 9, 10, every summer I'd get out there, I'd ride my bike for hours on end. This is before we had electronic devices, mind you. And I'd be out riding all weekend, and we just didn't know any better. We didn't use sunscreen. We certainly didn't have the types of sunscreen products we have today. And, every summer I would be literally just peeling layers of skin off my nose. Even if you have darker skin, even if you're not in as sunny a region, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of using sunscreen. It is the best anti-aging product. The sun's damage is the strongest aging substance that there is. So if you use sunscreen, you protect against aging, no matter your skin type, no matter your age. Of course, you better believe I'm pretty strict on my kids using sunscreen now. We didn't know about the dangers of the sun, but we do know about the dangers of the sun now. Also, I get sick of seeing misinformation on the internet about sunscreens being potentially dangerous or being, you know, the ingredients cancer causing. And honestly, it is posted by people that just don't know any better. With all of your actives, definitely with your sunscreen materials, regulators are very strict on ensuring safety of these products. And I can 100% guarantee you, and my surgeon tomorrow will tell you, that being out in the sun without sunscreen is way worse than any of these supposed dangerous sunscreen ingredients. So please use your sunscreen, protect your skin. And of course, if you wanted to have whiter, brighter skin, your sunscreen is also one of the best ways to get lighter, whiter skin. So please don't panic. I will be back to see you all very soon after my surgery. I've caught it early, like I say. For those of you out there, especially my New Zealand cousins as well watching this, if you're in Australia, if you're in New Zealand, if you have, or anywhere in the world really, but let's face it, Australia and New Zealand have the highest rates of skin cancer in the world. If you have any sort of scaly, scratchy type of skin abnormality and you think, hey, this isn't right, go and get it checked, because early detection means it doesn't turn into something super nasty. So enough about that. And again, thank you for being understanding that we had to move today and use sunscreen. Let's get stuck into our topic, actives and vitamins. Now, before we actually look at formulating with the actives and vitamins, I do want to just run through something really, really important that you need to remember whenever you're making an active or vitamin type selection: the definition of a cosmetic. So the overarching definition of a cosmetic, regardless of what sort of journal data or other data you may have about an ingredient, every cosmetic product has to comply with the overarching principles of a cosmetic product. Now, the definition of a cosmetic by word may differ a little bit around the world, but the overall context of what is a cosmetic versus what is a therapeutic good or medical agent is pretty similar, even though, like I say, some of the wordings may differ, but the meaning is generally the same around the world. And it is an externally applied product to protect, to maintain, to keep in good condition. So whenever you're formulating or creating an active or a cosmeceutical type product, you need to keep in mind that at the end of the day, when you're marketing this product to your consumer, you need to make sure that you're complying with the definition of a cosmetic, regardless of whether you hold strong medical evidence to suggest some sort of physiological or therapeutic benefit. You need to comply with the cosmetic definition. So that's why I know that sometimes people get very frustrated. They want to be able to make stronger claims about some of their actives. And sure, there may be some evidence to support that. And this definitely applies where you might be using a herbal extract, for example. But you must only make approved cosmetic claims about your cosmetic product. So today we're going to be focusing a lot on using actives and vitamins at their active amount. What's the difference? So when you use an otherwise active ingredient, let's say acetohexapeptide 8, for example, this is a peptide that has like your Botox-like activity, anti-aging activity. When you use a tiny amount, then you can only ever say the product contains that material. You can't say it's doing anything. You really should be using your actives or your vitamins, ideally, in an active proportion. And this means an amount that's been clinically proven to have an efficacious result. Sometimes people say, but isn't there a synergistic effect from using a couple of different vitamins or a couple of different actives? Again, if you hold evidence to show that specific synergistic effect from the inputs that you're using, you can use that evidence and, of course, make your cosmetic compliant claims. But where you're just assuming there's some sort of synergistic effect from using combinations of ingredients and you don't hold the evidence, then no, you should be using those actives at the clinically proven inputs if you want to make the active claim. Now, I have got other live presentations and other videos on using herbal extracts. I know a lot of you would have questions about herbal extracts. Please also watch those live videos and other free videos that I have, and that will answer a lot of your little questions about herbal extracts in particular. Today, I really want to focus on actives and vitamins that haven't already been covered in those herbal extract presentations. So please go watch those herbal extract lives after this one. There's a lot of great questions that I was asked in those as well, which might answer some of the questions you have sitting there watching today. So as I mentioned, today we're really going to be focusing on using these materials at their clinically proven, at their active input, rather than just adding them for marketing claims. Now, also, you will tend to find a lot of brands in the mid to high price range will tend to use 1 or 2 really good actives at their clinically proven inputs, and that's to get the best performance from the product. They will tend to also have other materials, sometimes your glycerin-based herbal extracts, sometimes other actives, sometimes some vitamins added at very small inputs, just to say it contains those ingredients. Now, sometimes this can be done as a bit of a marketing strategy so that you have some high performance ingredients and some ingredients at low inputs so that you can say the product contains it, so that you can compete with other products in the market and consumer expectations about what should be in this type of product, for example. Just make sure you're making the right types of claims based on your clinical evidence. And why would a company do that, you might be thinking? They do it because of cost. These active ingredients are not cheap. So you need to be aware that when you're choosing your active ingredients, you need to think about what you want the product to do and how you want it to do that. And there's also these other considerations of delivery. We have enhanced delivery topics on YouTube for you as well. And we really want to make sure that you're picking the actives that suit the budget, suit your target market, and achieve the performance that you're really hoping to achieve. That's ultimately what your consumer's looking for. I've got an example here, Durolene Amplified. So when you use the Durolene Amplified in the right amount and you get the supplier's permission, you could then use the before and after images in your marketing. You do need the supplier's permission. And again, I have a live on cosmetic claims and evidence, so please also watch that. I talk a lot about the evidence you need to make certain claims, the wording of certain claims, and definitely asking suppliers for their permission to use their images. In this case, if I got the supplier's permission to use their marketing material, they would usually want me to name their active. And then I could potentially make the claim contains Durolene Amplified, which has been clinically proven to reduce wrinkle depth around the eye area by up to 46.7% in 28 days, and visibly reduces wrinkle depth. Is also okay. Just because I've got clinical efficacy where I can be really specific, I can also make your generalized visibly reduces wrinkle depth claim as well. I could always also say contains acetohexapeptide 8, but that's not as strong or as bold as those clinically proven messages that really hit home to a consumer and help them decide between different brands or different products, which product's going to work best for me, which product's going to give me the results I'm looking for. And that's why you put the actives into your formula. So to use clinical proof claims, again, just a bit of a recap, please watch the live on claims and evidence. And I also have some other free videos on YouTube about claims and compliance with marketing in that way that definitely can fill in some background information for you. Just a bit of a summary. To remember that to use the clinical proof from a supplier, you must name the material, you must get permission from the supplier, and that evidence would only relate specifically to that exact trade name or supplier or grade of material. You must use in vivo efficacy data. It must be human trials. 20 people is ideal. Depending on how strong the results are, a little less may be acceptable, but 20 is definitely the ideal to see your clinically proven results. Make sure you're using the active at the same input that was used in the study. So we don't just use 1% or 5%. We use the amount that was used to obtain the clinical results. And in the Durolene Amplified example, you can see that 5% was used. So we would want to be using that in the same type of product. So was it a cream? Was it an emulsion type product? Or was it a serum? We want to use it in the same type of product form, and we need to apply it in a similar way. So, once or twice a day application. If they used twice a day application in their study, we need to use it in a product that's to be applied twice a day to get these sort of results. It's really important that you wouldn't use something like the Durolene Amplified. Even if you had it present in a formula at 5%, you couldn't put it at 5% into a once a week mask product, for example, and try and use that efficacy data or try and make those claims, because you don't hold evidence to support that it would have the same effect in a once a week application compared to if it was a twice a day study that was run. Now, of course, you don't have to use suppliers information. You can run your own product evaluations. And then, of course, it's formula and product specific. You don't have to name their material in that case. You can say that your product is clinically proven. So make sure, again, that you're always complying with the definition of a cosmetic, which in this type of example is visibly or appearance-based. Some additional considerations to think about, and I will get to questions soon, don't worry. Just adding your active is not always enough. Adding an active in the wrong type of base formula, in the wrong type of pH, or with other incompatible ingredients can make it absolutely pointless being there. So you do need to check the pH compatibility of the active that you want to use, and even your vitamins. You need to check the stability of the formula. If the formula is unstable, if there's color changes, separation, then there's probably something happening to your active or vitamin as well, and then the product just simply won't perform. You need to think about whether it's leave on or wash off. So again, if you've got a wash off product, you should only be using actives that have proof that they work in a wash off product, not using your leave on evidence for a wash off product, for example. That wouldn't be suitable evidence, and of course it just won't work the same way. Think too about the processing method. A lot of your actives need to be added below 40 degrees, and usually after an emulsion is formed, if you're putting it into an emulsion. There's some cases where they need heat. It's not often, but some do. So you need to check this on the supplier's information, because if you add it the wrong way, sometimes it may not, it's just as bad as not adding it at all. Also consider things like shear. Sometimes high shear will impact the performance of your active, so you may need to add them under low shear, or sometimes they might need high shear for proper homogeneous incorporation. So just check with the supplier's information if there's any special steps about the temperature or the shear that might be required. And also dispensing an application. You need to get the right amount of product to the right place to make sure it works. So sometimes when you're using a product, you may not get the results you're hoping for, and it could be any one of these reasons. It could be a couple of these reasons. So please make sure you pay attention to some of these needs of your different materials. There is no one set amount of every type of active that's going to work. There's no one set of, definitely not one set of pH compatibility that's going to work for all your different vitamins and actives. And of course, things like heat and shear can really impact the performance and stability of your active ingredients. Just as an example, I have here 3 different sources of vitamin C. And again, you'll see that I'm using trade names where it specifically applies to a material and that supplier's evidence. The key things I want you to really take home from this particular slide, and again, contact us. We're happy to give you this presentation. You can definitely read it and absorb it all later. What I want you to notice here is that the ascorbic acid, you can see the different inputs based on journal evidence. You can see the pH requirement is quite low. You can see that, you know, it's unstable to light and oxidation. You need to add it below 35 degrees. Then you look at the sodium ascorbyl phosphate. It needs an entirely different pH. It needs a pH above 7 to be stable. You can see it's a lot more stable in light compared to your ascorbic acid. And the clinical proof is based on the Stay C50 material from DSM. So I couldn't just assume that every other sodium ascorbyl phosphate will have this same effect. I can't just assume that another form like magnesium ascorbyl phosphate, for example, would have the same effect. I really need the evidence specific to the material and the grade of material that I'm using to make sure that I'm going to get the same result. And of course, I would also need to check the way it was used. Was it a twice-a-day product? Was it an emulsion type product? That's how I should be delivering it to my consumer to expect these same sort of results. And of course, then we've got another form, ascorbyl glucoside, AA2G by Nagase. And again, you can see a different input is required. You can see a different pH is required. You can see a sodium citrate buffer is required. So the big take-home message here is 3 forms of vitamin C, all with different pH requirements, all with different inputs to provide their benefits. There's just so much that relies on how it's put into the formula, how much is used, and of course the source to make sure you're getting the best performance from your active. So again, there's so many examples of where companies or formulators, when they're starting out especially, think that using the sodium ascorbyl phosphate from another supplier will yield the same results as the DSM material, but it may be a different percentage input. It may be a different grade completely. More or less may be needed. So again, make sure that you're looking specifically at each material to get its best performance and also that clinical evidence. So when we're using actives and vitamins, more is not necessarily better. You would base your input on the evidence. And a really good example is, say, using something like peptides. Now, if you've watched any of my videos, you know I absolutely love peptides. But peptides in general usually need to be added in very, very small amounts. Now, sometimes if they come as a powder or a very concentrated form, it is tiny amounts. Sometimes they'll come with other solvents or carriers, and I need to use more. How much do I need to use depends totally on the supplier and the grade, and I would look to their evidence to determine how much I should use in my formula. Make sure that you're double checking the compatibility and the correct processing method. I cannot emphasize this enough. A lot of times when I'm speaking with brands and they're just not getting the results they expect from their product, it comes back to their processing method, or usually, and often I see, pH or an incompatibility in the formula. Sometimes it may be that a chelating agent is needed, but one hasn't been added. Sometimes it's that an anionic emulsifier has been used when that may be incompatible with the active. Sometimes the active's been added too hot. Sometimes the active needs heat. So again, it's very active specific. You really need to do these checks to make sure you're making the right selection and using them properly in your formula for the best results. Make sure you check stability. Something goes wrong with that base, then it's either the active doing it or the active may also be affected. So be careful of that. And definitely, if you're formulating with actives and vitamins, stability testing is essential. It's always essential, but especially with a cosmeceutical product. Make sure that you base your inputs and decisions on the clinical data. You can run small in-house evaluations to make sure the product is performing the way that you expect. Of course, you can run bigger in-house evaluations too and get your claims from there. But I would recommend, even if you're using suppliers' data, you seek their permission, you're using that in your marketing and their before, after, and all their results images, I would still recommend that you test the product on at least a few people, and it can be just within your staff or family and friends, because you want to make sure that the product really is delivering on its promises. Development of product, coming to market, marketing of the product, these are all big investments of time and money. So you want to make sure that the product really delivers on its promises and really pleases your consumer. So run some of those evaluations before you go to market as well. And of course, you can run bigger in-house or even external evaluations to support your claims and evidence. Make sure that your claims always comply with cosmetic regulations. Remember, it's visibly or appearance-based in general, or maintains condition of. So again, make sure that it always complies with the definition of a cosmetic. Even if you hold data to suggest a physiological function, you can't make that claim. And remember, all data and evidence needs to be from in vivo results only. So if you wanted to run your own trials, there's a free video you can watch, cosmetic product evaluation video on YouTube, which shows you different equipment and how those trials are run. And of course, you can learn how to run your own in-house trials properly with proper industry recognized protocols, with our diploma of cosmetic brand management or our certificate in cosmetic regulatory essentials. And if you haven't studied with us before, if you're new to the channel and you just want to try us on, we have a fantastic cosmetic formulation fundamentals masterclass to make sure you get started right. There's so much misinformation on the internet. If you want to learn it properly and free, then we have our free cosmetic formulation fundamentals masterclass you can access through our workshop link from our website. So now over to you. Question time. Let's take a look at the questions we have. When we work with ultrafine ascorbic acid into lipid solvents like silicones or oil to avoid instability, are we compromising the penetration ability of the ascorbic acid? Well, your ascorbic acid is water soluble, unless you're using one that's been coated in some other way to ensure it can actually be put into the formula. I have a video showing, I can't think of the trade name off the top of my head, but I do have a video where I use an oil soluble form of ascorbic acid, and that is then quite stable. If you're just adding, even if it's a microfine ascorbic acid, if it's not lipid soluble or lipid compatible, it will settle out over time, which means each pump or dispensing of your oil won't contain the same amount of ascorbic acid because there's also no water delivery. It's not solubilized into any water. If it's ascorbic acid, it just won't come out of the formula. It will just be stuck in the packaging. So please watch that video on the oil soluble vitamin C on the YouTube channel. You could use that material definitely, and as long as you stabilize it so that each dispensing pump is then delivering the right amount of vitamin C, you would get really good results into the skin. So yeah, just be careful, because your straight ascorbic acid is water soluble, so that just would not work with oil. Question 2, what would be the best way to warranty the penetration of the ascorbic acid? Ascorbic acid is one of the least stable forms of vitamin C, as you just saw from that table before. So unless you're using an oil-soluble form, I would encourage you to investigate another water-soluble form of vitamin C. Why? Simply because when you're using ascorbic acid in water, which you kind of need to, unless it's the lipid-soluble form, it degrades so fast, and you need a really low pH. So in other words, you need to stabilize your formula with that very low pH in mind, and over time you'll find the product turns brown pretty quickly. That's just because the ascorbic acid is the least stable form of vitamin C. Now, having said that, again, there is oil-soluble forms, and again, I wish I could think of the trade name off the top of my head, but that particular material is stable in an oil continuous phase, and that is the way to use ascorbic acid. Of course, earlier in this presentation, I had a couple of different forms of vitamin C, which I would encourage you to use instead of ascorbic acid. And that's just because they're much more stable in a formula. You're going to see it's a much more skin-friendly pH that you'd be using. Pick the one that's going to suit the rest of your formula. You'll also find they are much more stable over a prolonged shelf life. And that's really, really important, because when your ascorbic acid product turns brown within the first 3 or 6 months of it being made, it's no longer got any vitamin C to do any good for the skin. So use a more stable form would be what I would be encouraging you, or use the oil soluble form and use it in an oil compatible phase. Otherwise, your ascorbic acid could be very disappointing for you 3 or 6 months down the track. Question 3, how can I add niacinamide and vitamin C together in a formula? The internet says it could be harmful by the synthesis of niacin acid, and both have different pH to work. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Can I start with that? Because you're now in the right place. Be careful about what you search on the internet, especially with actives and vitamins. There's so much misinformation. It's so frustrating. Okay, so niacinamide is actually a really, really stable substance. And again, I would be encouraging you not to use ascorbic acid. I'd be encouraging you to use it. Again, I've got back here, I've got a couple of different examples. The ascorbyl glucoside is quite stable in formulas. I would encourage you to use that one with the niacinamide. Perfectly safe and performs really, really well. Sorry, getting so many questions here. An active has a limit of 0.5 to 1% in my formula. I want to add the same active at 0.5% in all my products: serum, moisturizer, primer, foundation, concealer. As seen, consumer will layer it on skin one by one. I'm afraid that the limit of 1% will be crossed by layering and may cause harm to my consumer. Am I right or wrong? That's a really good question, and something you'd need to consider as part of your broader range. If the product is intended to definitely be layered, you should be considering the overall input from all the layers. Just remember, something like a foundation and concealer is only being applied once a day. So in that case, if you're going to have it in a serum to be followed by a moisturizer, and it's always going to be applied that way, 0.5% in each, so that you've got a total of 1%, would be good. I wouldn't put it in your foundation and concealer then, because it's a once a day application. Is there another active that could really enhance your product story or the product's performance without exceeding this recommended limit that would be a better addition? That's something to think about. The layering concept, the issue you have with a layering concept is if your consumer doesn't use all of the products, then they may not get the results they're hoping for. If you are definitely making sure that products are always sold in pairs and always used together, then again, treat it like the overall input, because it's layered, it's added. it is a cumulative effect, unless it's being washed off. But in this case, the description you've given me isn't being washed off. So think carefully about the layer. You may actually be able to enhance the product line and the overall product story by putting a couple of different actives in some of those products, so that then the consumer is not getting too much, because too much can be irritating and it may not be the best thing. Here, even on this slide, more is not necessarily better. Sometimes it can cause irritation. Sometimes you're just not getting the results. Sometimes it might be, you know, extra expense without extra benefit as well. So if you're going to be doing a layering concept, think about all those things and what's best for your brand. I would recommend a pair of products only, and then use some other actives in your other products to enhance the performance or results for your consumer. I was wondering what your thoughts are with one using retinol palmitate and bakuchiol in the same formula. My question there is why? Why would you bother? Okay, so retinol, I've got a vitamin A blog coming out very soon. I think I'll make a note of that somewhere actually to let you know. Vitamin A blog is coming out on the 22nd of February. This is available from our website, from our blog page. We've got some great blogs there too. We've got an acid blog, which you might be interested in. We've also got several vitamin formulating with different vitamin videos on YouTube. So vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin C, vitamin E, all on YouTube, showing the antioxidant effect of vitamin E, even under different conditions. Does vitamin E have a pro-oxidative effect versus oxidative protection? I even have a blog on that, and I have a video on that. Please explore YouTube. There's a lot of videos on vitamins there for you. And I have a cosmetic acids where I look at every single acid for you. That's coming out on the 29th of April. I was just editing that one today, actually. So that's something to really look forward to coming out. That's really going to guide you on inputs and how to use them. Back to this question with the retinol, palmitate, and bakuchiol. So bakuchiol, I absolutely love bakuchiol. I want to put a big plug in there for that. One of the things with retinol on its own, first of all, you may have regulatory limits, so check your region. Retinol palmitate isn't as active as retinol, but can still have some irritation, can still be regulated, can still be limited by regulatory limits as the ester form. So just be careful with that. One of the things I love about bakuchiol is you don't have the irritant risk. It is plant derived, and you get the same sort of result. So, you know, the question really is, what's your thoughts on using retinol, palmitate, and bakuchiol in the same formula? My question really is why? Why would you bother? I wouldn't bother. I would put bakuchiol, and let's say I'd put bakuchiol with niacinamide, for example. That would be a really great pairing. So just remember too that retinol needs a specific pH to maintain stability too, whereas bakuchiol doesn't. So it's an easier material to formulate with. It's no irritant, and it's plant-based. So remember that your retinol, palmitate, even though they are vitamin A, they are nature identical. They are synthetic. They are synthetically produced for commercial quantities. And again, your bakuchiol is natural. So I think bakuchiol is a big win. Like I say, that would be my preference, and then I would pair it with some niacinamide or something. Again, depends what I'm trying to achieve from that product, but that would be a really great pairing. Using aquoxyl and pentavitin in the same hyaluronic serum. In both examples, proven efficacy amounts are used, but am I just doubling up in your view? Now, aquoxyl is very much about humectant and hydrating. Pentavitin, off the top of my head, you're really testing me today. Pentavitin, I believe, is a combination of vitamins. So your aquoxyl is your real humectant. Aquoxyl is very much like the hyaluronic portion of the serum. Are you doubling up? I don't know. Can you ever have too much of a good thing with a humectant? Well, you can if it starts to make the skin feel warm or sticky. Other than that, your skin loves humectants. Like I say, pentavitin, off the top of my head, I think that's a combination of vitamins. And again, you'd need to look at efficacy data for the best input. But mixing humectant with vitamins, that's a great pairing. And again, the pentavitin would have efficacy data about its best input as well. So I'd say potentially you've got yourself a really hydrating active serum there. But again, look at the efficacy data and how it's applied to make sure that is the serum the best delivery vehicle. Don't forget, you can have serums with a little bit of emulsifier present, which then helps it become an emulsion, which is a better delivery system too. So just keep that in mind as well. Do you know a good carbomer for peeling? No, carbomers aren't really for peeling. If you're looking for that balling up effect, I have a gommage exfoliant video which just came out, I think, and that's on YouTube as well. Usually that peeling effect is from the combination of gums used. So carbomer on its own won't do it. You'd need to combine it with something else to get that peeling effect. I know peptides is a big topic, but are all peptides proven to work on the skin, or only the ones that there's evidence for or evidence on? Look, this is a big question. Peptides with clinical efficacy data from a reputable supplier, you get it to the delivery site, and it does need good penetration. So definitely look at our information on penetration enhancers. I love peptides, because if you can get them to the site that they need to be, they'll work every single time. But there's several issues with using a peptide, using the wrong amount. So don't just assume one input. And this comes to the second part of the question. We've said, you know, are all peptides proven to work on the skin, or only the ones that says evidence on? If you don't have clinical evidence from the supplier for the peptide that you want to use, you don't know the correct input. You won't know if it's going to have the same sort of performance and what rate to use it. So like I said, it's a bit of a big topic. If you use the peptide properly, if you have a good delivery system, they always work. They're fantastic. I love a peptide. If you don't have clinical efficacy data, if you don't have input guidance, if you don't have that information also about any incompatibilities, and if you don't put them in a good delivery system, they won't work. So if you're using a peptide and you're not getting the results you're hoping for, I would suggest it's one of those things. Definitely, I'm always more in favor of using the raw materials that come from known sources with the required data, than using a cheaper source that doesn't have the data and promises it's the same stuff, because quite honestly, it's not. And how are you going to know? The companies that put out these actives and vitamins, one of the reasons these materials cost so much is because they've got a lot of safety data behind them. They've got a lot of performance data, and that's really what you're paying for, because you want the product to work. Why are you using an active or a vitamin in your formula? You're using it because you want it to do something good for your customer. So really, you need to consider using those materials. Even if it does extend the budget, it's got to deliver on its promises. And the only way you know that is if you've got clinical efficacy data to prove it. It's a bit of a big answer there, but I hope that's helped, not just with the peptides, but in general. When you're making an active or a vitamin selection, use the materials that have the data to back up their use. In order to use actives in cosmetics, do we have to get FDA approval if we are making drug claims, specifically for the USA? Okay, so safety is one of the first things you need to think of, and there's the cirsafety.org website, which is where the FDA would seek their evidence from. FDA would also look at any regulatory restrictions or safety data from other countries in deeming a material safe. It's the company's responsibility putting the product onto the market to ensure the product is safe, stable, and effective. In the US, with the FDA, the way they look at it with safety is if they haven't specifically listed an ingredient is not okay in a cosmetic. So they have some that they say you definitely cannot use these in a cosmetic. But then there's others, and there's a lot that they don't necessarily say whether you can use them or not. One of the first sources they will go to check for safety and limits is cirsafety.org. Please do not post or mention certain other acronyms like EWG. Don't go there. That's not good information. cirsafety.org is what they use. And of course, there is the SCCS opinions from the EU Cosmetic Ingredient Database. These are really strong, reputable sources of information. FDA may also look at things like the Canadian hot list for limits for safety. So the safety is the first part. The next part of the question is really, do we have to get FDA approval if we aren't making drug claims? Well, first of all, like I say, check safety. Are you allowed to use it? Is there a regulatory limit elsewhere in the world? If that regulatory limit exists, why does it exist? Is it a safety problem? They're always going to look at that first. Then in terms of efficacy, remember, even if you have data that shows that, a certain active or ingredient is good for, skin cancer, you can't make that claim about a cosmetic. Okay, you just can't. It doesn't matter how strong your evidence is. You cannot make that claim about a cosmetic. Remember your cosmetic. Remember the definition of cosmetics presented at the start of this presentation. I had that there because this is really important. Even if you hold the evidence that, to say that something's, absolutely fantastic at healing even. You cannot make that claim about a cosmetic. It has to be appearance or visibly or maintains in good condition. So you don't need FDA approval for these sort of things. You need to comply with the cosmetics definition, which again, the FDA definition is worded slightly different, but the overarching principle, the message, the requirement is still the same. And of course, they are definitely going to look for safety with these ingredients. So of course, if they have a material that's listed as a drug ingredient, then you definitely can't use it in a cosmetic. Particularly if they've also said that it can't be used in a cosmetic. But if it's known as a drug agent, if it's prohibited in other regions around the world because of its safety or known drug activity, if it's on the Canadian hot list, if it's on the, if the SCCS opinions advise against it or provide limits, even if CIR safety doesn't have it, and usually they do, but even if they don't have it, then you've got to prove that you've checked that these ingredients are safe and suitable for use. So that is how the FDA, that's how any regulator is going to look at the use of ingredients if they don't have any limits already listed. And of course, like I say, FDA doesn't have a lot of limits, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to consider safety from these other sources, the reputable sources that I've just mentioned. How can I use a high percentage, 10% of salicylic acid in the formula? Again, my question would be why? Salicylic acid is very hard to get into a formula. I do have videos, actually I've got 2 videos already, 3 videos maybe on my YouTube channel using salicylic acid in different product forms. You do need to actually disperse it in some propane diol or propylene glycol first to get it into the formula. You need to keep the pH very low. Now, if you're using 10% of salicylic acid, first of all, depends where you are in the world. That is a regulatory restricted ingredient, so you may not be able to use that much to begin with. The second thing is much above 2%, you're not really getting much greater efficacy. You could just be getting potential irritancy and definitely potential instability. Salicylic acid will tend to recrystallize out of a formula quite easily. So you need to keep that pH low. You need to dissolve it in propane diol or propylene glycol first and then add it into your formula. So the question really is about how can I use 10% of salicylic acid? I'm going to discourage you from doing that. I'm not going to give you recommendations of how to do that because I wouldn't recommend you do that. I would recommend about 2%. I would recommend you keep the pH very low, around 3.5. And I would recommend that you disperse it first in some propane diol and propylene glycol. So I really hope that's helped. And I make these recommendations for safety and performance and stability reasons, because that much in a formula, just you wouldn't get a really good shelf life. Is there any way to thicken Zamia? Zamia's propane diol? No, there is not. I would like to ask if it is safe to use retinol with vitamin C in a formula. Some sources do not suggest, some brands use the 2 ingredients. In terms of safety, and if you're using a sodium ascorbyl phosphate form or the ascorbyl glucoside form, potentially you'd be okay. Again, check the limits. Retinol itself can cause a lot of irritation and is also regulatory restricted. You definitely cannot use ascorbic acid and retinol in the one formula because the pH clashes severely. Ascorbic acid needs a pH of around 3.5. Retinol needs a pH of around 6 to 7. So you can't use the 2 in the one formula, but you can use other forms of vitamin C. Now, from a safety perspective, there's no reason why you can't use both together, as long as you keep in mind the input of retinol. And most of your regulatory limits are around 1% or less. Again, check with your local country regulations because it could be different. If you're using that below 1% input of retinol, again, check the regulations. But if you're using below 1% and you're using ascorbyl glucoside, for example, and your final pH is around 6.5 and you're stabilizing it with a sodium citrate buffer and you're using a chelating agent and everything else to keep it stable, you're potentially okay. But just keep that in mind. It's not going to be an easy formulation, and you need to also consider everything else in that formula needs to be stable in, and that will be quite a strong electrolyte environment. So that's another stability concern. So yeah, you can definitely do it. Just make sure you're using the right forms, make sure it's the right pH, and make sure you check those regulatory limits. Or make your life easy and use bakuchiol instead. We actually have a video, Vitamin A Alternatives, where I run through, it's actually a material that I've just started using that I'm really, really liking the results of, Lana Blue by Lipid. Yes, I get to use all these actives and find out the ones that I have my favorites. Like I say, I love bakuchiol. I tried the Lana Blue. Lana Blue is quite similar in terms of its performance to Vitamin A, and it's like a bakuchiol alternative. So I thought I'd give it a go. And I've got to say, I'm quite happy with the results so far, and definitely no irritation. I actually do get irritated with retinol, so I won't use it, or I'll use it in very, very low amounts. No problems using something like Lana Blue or bakuchiol. And again, we have that vitamin A derivative video on YouTube, as well as several vitamin A serum videos for you as well. How many vitamins with compatibility it would be suitable for a rich formulation? Well, it's more to do with why are you adding them all, and the pH of the different vitamins and the inputs, and if that's then going to destabilize your formula. So if you've got the right form of a vitamin that's then going to be pH compatible with all the other vitamins in your formula, and then you're stabilizing it in an appropriate way, and you're, say, putting it into an emulsion type formulation, you know, and it's delivering effectively, then it would potentially be all right. Remember, more doesn't mean better either. So look at the inputs recommended, and in combination, you could have a very high performing product. But just don't keep using more or adding heaps of ingredients into a formula. It can destabilize it. It can be irritating. There may be better ways of putting that formula together. So again, you know, if you do want to learn more about correct inputs of different vitamins, then please study with us. These are high performing products. You want them to perform well, but they need to be stable, and you need to get really good delivery to the site where the activity is required to get the results you're looking for. And that's definitely covered in our certificate in advanced cosmetic science and our diploma of personal care formulation, and definitely even just learning research for marketing purposes and labels and claims is in our diploma of cosmetic brand management. And of course, we do cover things like evidence in our diploma of personal care formulation and certificate in advanced cosmetic science, because you can't be a formulator if you don't know how to compile the evidence and check the inputs, and then you'd give that to a brand manager for them to do the marketing. So again, some of these questions that I'm getting, just be aware that where I'm saying why would you do that, or is there possibly other combinations of ingredients that might give you the same or better types of results and marketing performance, it could be that there are other alternatives or better options for you that don't have some of the stability or potential irritancy or even potential regulatory issues of using materials like retinol, for example. I'll just pick that one, or using some of your acids, for example. So just keep that in mind. And also, if you're reading a lot of products that have a lot of these ingredients already, and you're going to be competing in the same space, how are you going to compete if you're using exactly the same ingredients? So think of that too. We have our cosmetic build your brand workshop as well. Very first lecture is absolutely free, and it goes through these concepts of finding that point of difference, as well as, you know, what does your product need to have in it to compete effectively against your competitors, and that can then make your formulation decisions for you. So you might find that really useful in making some of your ingredient decisions as well. I used biotin powder in my hair formula at 0.22%. pH is around 6 to 6.5, but the product makes sensitivity to users. That sounds odd. Biotin doesn't usually do that. So I would suggest there's probably something else in your formula that might be causing that sensitivity. I can't really answer without knowing what's completely in that formula, but biotin is not a material that would normally do that. So please check your formula. There's maybe something else, or yeah, especially that pH too. It's not an irritating pH either. Is it best to add niacinamide in the cool down phase or the water phase before heating when creating an emulsion? Niacinamide is actually one of your most stable vitamins out there. It tolerates a heat of around 70 degrees. Because it's so water soluble, I would actually say add it at the end after heat, because if your heat goes over 70 degrees, as a lot of emulsions do, they get to 75, sometimes 80 degrees, even just for a short period of time, you're going to destroy some of your efficacy. So it's so water soluble, you can just add it later and just give your product a good stir. I'd say add it in the cool down phase. You don't need to, but I like to do that because then I don't have to worry in case my mixing, and especially if you've got a big vat of product and you're heating that through, it can get over 70 degrees, and that then is a problem for niacinamide. Up to that point, it is fine. How much retinol do I use to get the same result as medical tretinoin? Okay, I'm not going to answer that because tretinoin is a prescribed substance, and I don't want to imply that there would be a safe amount of vitamin A that would give you the same result. I'm not going to do it. There are regulatory restrictions over these ingredients to protect the safety of consumers. Please don't push the limits look to your regulatory restrictions. They're there to ensure safety of your consumers, and you can't be trying to use an active to get a pharmaceutical result. Pharmaceutical products have a lot more restrictions and regulations around them to protect consumers and make sure that they are always doing exactly as they're supposed to. And in some cases, like tretinoin, it can be very, very irritating. It can be a big problem for a consumer. Let's not pretend our cosmetics are drugs, okay? It's verging on being unsafe, and I'm just not going to do that. So yeah, please use the recognized sources and your regulatory limits to make sure that you're producing safe, stable, and effective products. We don't need to push the bar. We can make amazing products using cosmetic ingredients that are totally compliant. Let's focus on that. Which new preservatives are used in cosmetic products? This is a conversation about actives today. I'd like to stick to that topic, but we do have some great free videos on preservatives in our YouTube channel, and we also teach preservatives so that you can investigate all sorts of preservatives. We had that as a separate certificate course, Certificate in Cosmetic Preservatives, which helps you investigate and use all sorts of preservatives from all sorts of suppliers. Need to understand if sodium ascorbyl phosphate can combine with silk peptide. Generally, it can. Again, just check the pH. Generally, your silk peptide will handle the type of pH you need for sodium ascorbyl phosphate, but just double check it. What's the difference? Oh, sorry. Any tips of using blue spirulina? Have tried different percentage, typically less than 0.3%, but can't seem to create a nice soft blue color. Look, this can be impacted by the grade and the source of the material. I can't really answer that without using the particular source that you're using. The best thing you can do is you could go back to the supplier and you can definitely ask them. They would know specific to their grade, and of course, just make samples. And then, you know, the more samples you make, the better the product becomes specific to what you're hoping to achieve. What's the difference between extracts and actives, and can they be heated or always added below 40 degrees? Okay, so a glycerin-based extract is not necessarily an active, no matter how much you use. Some of your herbal extracts, well, herbal extracts with clinical efficacy data, when used at the input that's proven in that clinical efficacy data, are actives. And of course, actives like peptides can't ever be extracts. So that's the difference and the similarities. So they can sometimes be the same thing. They generally should not be heated, but there are some actives that do need to be heated to be added into formulas. And again, please check the supplier's information to be sure about adding your active properly. Most of them and most of your extracts should be added below 40 degrees. I don't like to say always, because it's definitely not correct to say always. Generally, it'll be below 40 degrees, but please check your supplier information to make sure you're using that material in the right way to get the best result. I'm looking for active ingredients for men's cosmetics. Okay, so of course, if you study with us, you get access to a database that's got thousands of raw materials in there. Otherwise, you can join things like UL Prospector. That's a fantastic database to search. When you study with us, you also get access to UL Prospector. And yeah, that's how you find your local suppliers. Of course, when you study with us and you get your qualification, you can even join the International Federation for Society of Cosmetic Chemists or your local Society for Cosmetic Chemists as a student. And once you are a member of these societies, you can get networking with other cosmetic chemists and those important suppliers that can provide you with all of these different actives and vitamins. So definite benefits. Even when you're a student, you'll get access to UL Prospector, you'll get access to your IFSCC or local Society of Cosmetic Chemists, and of course you get this massive database full of materials so that you know which suppliers to contact for which materials. Would NAG, B3 and retinol compatible in the same formula? NAG, are you talking about the Nagase, the ascorbyl phosphate? Then potentially, so niacinamide B3 is compatible over quite a broad pH range. Retinol, again, needs pH around 6 to 7, and that Nagase material needs pH around 6.5. Potentially, yes, they would be. Just check how much you're using to get the best results. Also, think about the stability of the formula over the long term. You'll need a sodium citrate buffer. You'll also need a chelating agent, and definitely do stability testing to make sure. But in theory, it's worth testing. Again, be careful. Retinol has regulatory limits. Check for your local region. Is it safe to use benzoic peroxide? I'm thinking of benzoyl peroxide. Is that might have been an autocorrect, might have changed your spelling. You will need to check your local country regulations. Again, this is another really regulated material. When it's used correctly in a formula, yes, it is suitable to use. Ensuring its safety in the finished product, ensuring the right amount so that you're compliant with regulations, and then doing some tests to ensure that it doesn't cause excessive irritations. Is the company putting the product onto the market? It's their responsibility. So if you want to use it, check regulatory limits, definitely formulate effectively with it so that you can maintain stability over a prolonged period, and then definitely run some evaluation tests to ensure its safety. Thanks for bringing up bakuchiol. What are your thoughts on doing your own bakuchiol seed extract? No, there's plenty of efficacy data out there from the supplier. Use that material. Otherwise, you've got to run all those efficacy tests yourself. Do you have the know-how? Do you have the ability? And again, it's got to be in vivo efficacy. It's got to comply with all the protocols. Of course, you can learn how to do those protocols with us. But if you've got a perfectly good material from a very reputable supplier, DKSH, I believe, I'd just use the bakuchiol material and focus on other aspects, other formulas, your marketing plan, all of those other things that are so important to have a successful brand. Merck recommend when using Ronicare nicotinamide that the final formulation has a pH of 5 to 7.5 to avoid hydrolysis and free acid formation, and that best stability is at pH 7. However, I don't find this same recommendation from other suppliers of niacinamide. Should I assume that when using any niacinamide in a formulation that I should formulate to pH 7, or if the supplier does not state any specific pH, I adjust pH to suit the skin? Always look for the pH that's recommended by the supplier and use that range. There could be a reason. It could be something to do with the chemical composition of their particular material. It could be that there's other solvents present. It could be that there's other stabilizers present. Always, and this is why I've said repeatedly, look for the supplier's data specific to the grade or the material you're going to use. Niacinamide, if you ask me, can be used over quite a broad pH range. It's quite a stable material. But if they've specifically said that there's a best pH range for their material, then that is definitely what you would follow, because that's their material. They've done their tests to ensure performance and stability. So, again, you can use different materials. Again, I've said today, generally you would add below 40 degrees, but if a supplier's data says you should use their active, you should add it at 55 degrees, then that's what you should be doing. So definitely in this case, if you're seeing conflicting information, I would rely on the information specifically from the supplier for the material that you're going to use. So I really hope that's helped, and hopefully that helps everyone, not just this material, but anytime you're making an active or a vitamin selection, that's the best thing you can do, is look for the exact grade and that supplier's information about its best stability, because they know the full composition and processing of how that material was put together. Can actives be used in cosmetics or just over-the-counter drugs? Now, cosmetic actives, when used under regulatory limits for cosmetics, when used in appropriate forms, when used with appropriate claims, can be used in cosmetics. They're not considered drugs in those situations. Where it would be considered a drug is if that country considers the product a drug. Sunscreens is a perfect example. In Australia, there's a very confusing set of regulations, and we're definitely out of time for me to discuss that now. In Europe, for example, sunscreens, any SPF is a cosmetic. In USA, sunscreens, any SPF is instantly considered a drug. And in Australia, you've got this very confusing set of rules around it. So basically, when you're using an active, when you're presenting the product to a consumer, you do need to think about how your local regulatory limits are set, or the presentation or form of the product, as to whether it would be considered a drug. Because really, we're talking about cosmetics here, and there's some amazing actives you can use to get some really amazing visible or appearance-based results, or maintaining in good condition results. We don't need to try to make them drugs. We can get amazing results from good active selection and good cosmeceutical products. How would you effectively disperse allantoin? I would measure it out and add it to the appropriate formulation type. It's actually a pretty easy material to use, so I'm not sure what problems you've been having. But yeah, it's really good soothing material. It's great to use with some of these actives that can sometimes be a bit irritating. What are your thoughts about hydroquinone? Regulatory restricted. that's enough for me. Most actives are acidic. How do I use them in bar soaps that's alkaline? You can't. That would be a big incompatibility issue. And also think if it's a bar soap, it's a wash-off product. So even if it had great efficacy data, let's just pick vitamin C because we've talked about it a lot. There's no data to support the use of vitamin C in a wash-off product, so why use it? You could instead use a glycerin-based extract that's rich in vitamin C, Kakadu plum, e.g. That would go into your soap. It's not going to provide any great benefits because it's a wash-off product and there's no efficacy data to support its use in a wash-off product. But at the same time, there's no need to add some of these materials in a wash-off product because you're just not going to get the results you're hoping for. What is a good site for active regulations? Learn with us because it differs around the world and it's not exactly easy to search in different places around the world either. And then you've also got to interpret the results, and it's the company putting the product onto the market that's responsible for interpreting those results properly. We have our certificate in cosmetic regulatory essentials that teaches all of your marketing claims and ingredient compliance all around the world. And then we have our diploma of personal care formulation that teaches very specifically about your ingredient regulations. It does teach obviously marketing and claims to make the right selections and evidence base. But if you want the full marketing compliance, labels, claims, then you would be doing our diploma of cosmetic brand management instead. Now, just remember, brand management isn't looking at the inputs of ingredients. Formulation is not looking at the full what needs to be on my label type of compliance. Definitely looks at the evidence that you need to support claims and making ingredient selection. But definitely in our diploma of personal care formulation, we have an entire unit that looks at multi-country compliance and how to do searches in different countries around the world, because there's not just one site. And also you've got to remember that even if you've got a country where it maybe doesn't mention an ingredient, the implication is on the brand putting the product onto the market that they are ensuring safe use by their consumer. And if there is a strict regulation that applies in another region of the world, and you're not considering why that regulation exists, and then your consumer has a problem with the product, the regulator would question, why didn't you use that evidence or information from another part of the world? So you really do need to learn compliance properly. Saying I didn't know is not an excuse to a regulator. And if you're going to start playing around with actives and vitamins, you need to make sure that you're compliant with safety and performance in mind. And of course, there's always stability. You're using these types of ingredients and they can have a big impact on the stability of your formula. And if the formula is not stable, well, your consumer's not happy, but the product's not working. So stability is also really essential. And that is in our certificate in advanced cosmetic science and our diploma of personal care formulation. You can even study it as a separate little certificate program if you're already okay with formulating, but you want to learn how to conduct quality and stability checks. In particular, we do have a certificate where we take those units from those bigger courses and make a certificate for you. And then we've got a thank you. Awesome as always. Good luck for tomorrow. Yes, thank you. Oh, it's going to be all right. We just look, I got it early. We're going to remove it. And again, another big shout out there for use sunscreen. And of course, if you've got anything suspect on your skin, get it checked and get it out. So thank you again for your understanding about having to move the time and date so quickly. I hope to see you back on YouTube real soon. You'll probably see me back out there from next Friday with another video, hopefully. Thank goodness I know the best type of makeup to use to cover any sort of scarring. So thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you for another live in March. And in the meantime, happy formulating.